Hello, my name is Matt Hancock. I'm a principal at Praxis Consulting Group. Praxis has been around for about 30 years. We are a leadership development and organization development firm specialized in working with employee-owned businesses to help make the connection between individual contribution and firm performance to really tap into the performance potential of sharing ownership with your employees. And I am so excited to be speaking today with Priya Iyer Doshi, who's the president of Capacity Interactive. Capacity Interactive is a digital marketing firm for the arts. I'm not going to say too much more because we're going to get more into Priya, who you are, who CI is, and other themes throughout the course of our interview. But before we jump into the details, tell me a little bit about your firm's background, and I'm particularly interested in like your history. When do you come into the picture, and how do you make it to the role that you're in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, thanks for having me. And I'm happy to be sitting down with you for this conversation. Again, I'm Priya Iyer Doshi, president of Capacity Interactive. And Capacity Interactive is a digital marketing consulting firm that specifically serves nonprofit arts and culture. We work with almost 300 arts and cultural institutions across North America, mostly the US and Canada. We do that across a number of services, and we've been around since about 2008. We're a fully remote firm at this point. That wasn't always true, but it is now true. And I'll talk a little bit more about the history when I talk a little bit more about our ownership later on in the interview. But in terms of me, I joined Capacity Interactive back in 2016, actually as a digital marketing analyst. And so at the time before Capacity, I was working in Broadway marketing. And I got to know about the company's annual conference. And so I actually had my previous employer send me to Capacity's annual conference, which is called Boot Camp. And I just got exposed to a really incredible firm, and I was very inspired by it. And so I made some connections there and sort of weaseled my way into the firm as an analyst in 2016. I was with the company for about 4 years, and in that time, I grew to manage my own portfolio. I spoke on the bootcamp stage, which was a very crazy moment for me, given that that's how I learned about capacity initially. And in 2019, I decided to move from New York, where I was living at the time and where Capacity was based at the time, to Los Angeles, just a lifestyle move. I was exhausted from living in New York and wanted to move to LA. So I did that, and I stayed with the company. I stayed remote, and through a random turn of events, a job offer for a firm in San Diego landed in my lap. So I took what I now call my CI hiatus for about a year and a half to go and work at this firm and lead client services there. That year and a half, interestingly enough, was from February of 2020 until about May of 2021. And in January of 2021, when the world was completely upside down for all the reasons that we know, our founder gave me a call and told me that he was thinking about his next chapter, and he asked if I would come back and lead the firm, which was completely unexpected. And I was actually driving when he told me this, and I was like, "Excuse me," and he was like, "Do you need to pull over the car?" It was a really funny moment.
I was just thinking, I hope you pulled over.
I actually didn't. I kept going.
Oh my gosh.
With the momentum. But yeah, so he sort of explained to me that he was ready for his next chapter, and all he saw in me and all he was hoping I'd bring to the role, and my leadership in the firm. And ultimately he convinced me. And so I came back in July of 2021, and I have been in the role ever since. So that's me and my history with CI.
That's really fascinating. And I think one of the reasons that I'm interested in having conversations like this is so that other firms and other leaders can learn from leaders in the field who are doing interesting, creative, and important work, who are leading employee-owned businesses. And so we want to talk about your ownership structure, and I want to talk about the role that hospitality plays in your culture. But I just
Yeah.
feel like taking a step back a second for the benefit of other leaders who might be watching this. Can you tell me a little bit more about your journey as a leader? And a couple of things that I'm particularly interested in is, one is, where are you from? Like, where'd you grow up? What were
Yeah.
you doing before you joined CI? And before you got that call from your founder, what type of leadership roles had you been in particular at Capacity Interactive?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in terms of where I grew up, I was born in Wisconsin, and I split my childhood, I would say, between a suburb of Atlanta, where I moved when I was 5, and a suburb of Pittsburgh, where I moved when I was 11. So kind of split my childhood between those two places. I have always been a lover of the arts, and that was a big formative part of my upbringing. Originally, it was South Asian arts, so I was very involved in classical Indian dance and classical Indian music, singing. Eventually, that transitioned into more Western styles and specifically musical theater. And so by high school, a lot of my life was consumed by musical theater performance, which ultimately led to me going to college for musical theater
Oh,
performance. So
wow.
yeah, so I went to school in upstate New York, Ithaca College, one of the best musical theater performance programs in the country. So I'm very proud to have done that. And, I started my college experience in that musical theater performance track. Couple years into college, sort of realized that the life of a performer might not be as stable as the life that I wanted to lead.
Mm-hmm.
But I very much have always believed that the arts have this profound power to change the way that people think and change the
Mm-hmm.
way that people perceive the world. And I think it's through those shifted perspectives that the world builds more empathy and more compassion. And so I always have been a big believer in the arts and have always wanted to contribute to that. So when I decided I didn't want to be a performer anymore, I very much still wanted to stay in the industry. And I spent the second couple years of my college experience exploring different ways to do that. So I explored general management, stage management, company management, just a number of things.
Sure.
And ultimately, the job that brought me to New York City was a job in Broadway marketing. Now,
Okay.
Broadway to me had always been this star in the sky. The ultimate dream was to work on Broadway. So it was absolutely surreal moving to New York when I was 22
Oh my
to work
gosh.
for a Broadway producer in a marketing team. I got to help open a show on Broadway. I went to the Tony Awards. It was all very sparkly and very, very exciting. And so that's kind of how I got my career started. I would say that in terms of leadership roles and like the types of roles that I held before I held this role, while I was at Capacity, like I was talking about earlier in my trajectory at Capacity, my first team leader role was in my, I think, second year with Capacity. So
Okay.
in that, I led a team of 3 up to 6 people, and ultimately led a portfolio myself. So I had a portfolio of clients. The buck sort of stopped with me for that portfolio of about 20 clients. And that, those types of leadership roles, ultimately, I went on to lead other leaders at Capacity. So that was another leadership experience that I had. And then once I left Capacity for that hiatus that I was talking about, that was a decent jump for me in terms of leadership role. Because at that firm, Raindrop, it's called, in San
Okay.
Diego, I essentially led client services. So I had a number of portfolio managers, about, I want to say maybe 10 or so, who then reported into me. And the buck sort of stopped with me when we had challenging clients that the portfolio managers felt like they couldn't handle, that had to come up to me, for
Okay.
example. So that was the role I had before president. So certainly, I would say jumped over a couple of other levels that I might have expected myself to have before jumping into this role.
But it seems like I'm hearing sort of individual contributor
Yeah,
to leading a team,
yeah,
to leading at a much larger scale in an organization,
yeah.
at a senior level,
Hmm.
and then becoming the president.
Yeah.
Um, This is so interesting. I did not get involved in the arts to the extent that you did, but I had acted all through high school.
Yeah.
And I oftentimes reflect on how important of a leadership development experience theater was.
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
just because you learn about sort of how to use your presence, right, on stage,
Hmm. Hmm.
not just because you learn how to be part of a team and, at sometimes you're leading and sometimes you're following, but
Hmm.
also because for us, at least at Praxis, right, leadership development really starts with knowing yourself, leading yourself before you can lead
100%.
others. And there's
Yes.
so much work that theater does to help you know
Yes.
yourself better.
Yeah,
So I'm just
absolutely.
curious, are there some, just really quickly, as you reflect on your, because I'm seeing sort of a straight line where maybe others are saying, oh my gosh, act, theater, and then this. What are some of the things that, as you're thinking about that experience with theater, like being
Yeah.
on stage, I mean,
Hmm.
as you reflect in your leadership role now as
Yeah.
president, what comes
Yeah.
to mind in terms of things that were helpful in
Yeah.
preparing you for this?
Well, I think there are a couple things. The first thing that I'll say is more about my training in college than it is about
Hmm.
actually being on stage. And, you hit a little bit on this when you were just talking about your own experience with theater. But I think so much of the training was about us. If you think about an actor taking on a role, you have to understand what the blank canvas is before you can then put something on it, right? And so a lot of what I spent my college experience doing, there's all these stereotypes about theater kids like rolling around on the floor in their like black clothes, and absolutely we did do that. But a part of that was about learning what my blank canvas was. Like I learned more about who I am, what makes me tick, why I am the way that I am, things that you don't think twice about, how you walk, how you gesture, how you move, why you do things that way. You have to learn so intimately before you then can change those things when you're assuming a character. And
Hmm.
so I think just that learning about my blank canvas has also helped me see, my own shortcomings as a leader and things that I need to compensate for. Like, do I, for example, when someone's talking, am I listening so that I can respond, or am I listening to actually listen? And based on what the default is and what I want to be doing, how can I tweak, in the moment? It just
Oh.
causes you to be very introspective, I think, in that way. So that's one thing about the training that just has really helped me, is I feel like I'm constantly observing myself and trying to understand whether what I'm doing is happening by default or by intention. And I try to
Mm.
be really intentional. I think the other thing in terms of being on stage is, of course, in this role and in roles like these, there are many times where you have to sort of stand in the spotlight. At our annual conference, I have to stand in the spotlight. So there's certainly transferable skills in that way. But I think there's a sense of resilience that comes from having experienced live theater. You never know what's going to happen in the moment. You can't edit it out. You
Wow.
just kind
Yep.
of have to go with the flow. You have to be very flexible. You have to be very aware of all of the things happening around you. And I think that has certainly helped me. You also have to be very clear in your communication. And
Hmm.
that piece has certainly helped me just in my current role now.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for going way off script and sharing some of
Yeah.
these reflections. It's
Oh,
it's
for
to,
sure.
to me, I notice with myself, and I'm assuming this will resonate for you, but sometimes in the moment, like as you're living your life and you're pursuing theater, and then you're doing this, sort of maybe one foot in front of the other, and then there's moments where you are at a certain point in your journey, and you have a minute to stop and to maybe like turn around and look behind you and go, wow, all of that added up to something,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
can see how these different threads that might seem disconnected, there's times when they might come together in the role that you're in right now.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I think, yeah, to your earlier point, it's easy to, in a brand new conversation with a brand new person, say I went to school for musical theater, and for that to not make sense, but to me it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, oh, but that really resonates for me. I
Yeah.
think we have to pull this a little bit back on topic because there's two
Yes.
really important things that we want to make sure that we address today. One is, and there are two things that make you as an organization very unique. One is your ownership structure, and two is the role that this idea of hospitality plays in your culture and in how you're positioning the firm competitively. So can you share with us first a little bit about your ownership structure? You're an employee-owned business, which
Yes.
means in your case, 100% of the business is owned by your employees through a thing called an employee stock ownership plan, which is a special retirement plan that makes employee ownership possible without employees having to take money out of their own pocket. I'm going to stop there and let you tell us about the ESOP and that ownership structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a little bit of CI history to sort of set up how CI got to this place in particular. So Capacity Interactive started in our founder's apartment. Eric Gensler is our founder, and it started in his apartment in Brooklyn, just born out of his deep passion for the industry and deep curiosity for digital. He never dreamed that it would get quite to this, or at that time, it was not his intention. I'm sure he dreamed it, but that was not his intention. He just wanted to leverage the power of digital to support the industry. And even that annual conference I talked about earlier, in its beginning, it was 50 people in 2011, and it was just born out of Eric's curiosities and a desire to bring together people who were also curious so that they could all learn together. And over time, through word of mouth, his network, the company grew to be more than just Eric could handle. And so slowly he started to bring people on. One of his early people was our managing director, who he really built the foundation of CI with. And again, now we have grown to serve over 270 organizations. At one point, our team was almost 100 people. The conference has served over 600 people in years when you think about people in person and streaming. And that's not what he was thinking about necessarily when he was sitting in his apartment back in 2008. And in order to get to where CI is now, he didn't build that all by himself. A big part of that was this strong leadership team that he built in the early days, many of whom are still here today, and a strong team of consultants, many of whom are also still here today and have been with us for over 10 years. And so, when he got ready for his next chapter, it was sort of a two-part transition that he had to think about. One was he had to think about who the new leader, the new president of the company would be, someone who aligned on the values and could help the firm grow in different and new ways. And ultimately he asked me to take over that part, but the ownership transfer was also a piece of that transition for him. And he wanted to do it in a way that would honor both his legacy and this team's legacy, because again, he didn't build this alone. And so he considered a few different solutions, but ultimately he landed on selling to the employees and becoming an ESOP, because ultimately that felt like the perfect solution to carry on CI's legacy for both the team and the industry. It also was the solution that protects the values and the culture of this place. And we are a very culture focused company, values focused company. That has been just such a core pillar of what has stayed constant. They certainly have, our values and our culture have evolved over time, but our focus on those things have stayed strong. And it was really important to him that that was preserved.
What we see with employee-owned businesses, what we see, that's, the research tells us that there's a performance potential with sharing ownership, that your company can do a lot better sharing ownership than competitors who aren't doing that, if you've got an ownership culture in place. And so the way we think about employee-owned businesses is there's a couple of kind of categories. One is the ESOP is the icing on the cake or the cherry on top. This is me putting the cherry on top. And so we've always had this culture of ownership, and now we're actually sharing ownership. The other category that we see is, oh boy, we know that we're going to go the ESOP route. We're going to transition to employee ownership, And we really need to make some changes to our culture so that we can really take advantage of that. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, as you reflect back on when you transitioned to the ESOP, in what ways was this the cherry on top and you felt that the culture was really prepared to embrace employee ownership? And what were some elements that maybe had to change, if any, in order to best take advantage of that, or to support that transition even?
Yeah. I think some of the things that we already had in place that were very much a part of our culture before we became an ESOP are: one, we've always had a deep focus on training. From the beginning, we hire more for people who are values fit to our
Hmm.
company as opposed to people who are hard skills fit or they come in with
Hmm.
specific hard skills. And we invest at this point almost 3 months worth of time for people to be in what we call CIU, Capacity Interactive University.
Okay.
It's meant to be a training setting, and we very much set the expectation that the only expectation is to learn and absorb as much information as you can. You come in here, you don't know how to build a meta campaign, no problem. We're here to help you do that. You don't know how to build conversion tracking, no problem. We're here to help you do that. And we very much hire people who we see potential in to be able to learn and apply all of these things, but more so for a values fit and not a hard skills fit, and therefore invest in training. And I think that's a big part that helps us now as an ESOP as well. Another part would be we have a deep focus on communication, the way that we're communicating things out, and a sense of transparency that has always
Okay.
been important to us. We don't want information to feel gated. We want it to feel open. Certainly, we're a business. Not all information can be put out on the table. Everybody is not going through the budget with a fine tooth comb. It's not that, but it is very important to us to be very clear and open about how the company is performing, for example, or how we are strategically thinking about growth. Really trying to help people understand what all of those components of running the business look like. And to be honest, it's not always easy to do that because
No, of course not.
with this additional information comes additional responsibility, deep responsibility. Sitting at the table, being invited to the table to converse in these types of topics comes with deep responsibility. It can't come without that, right? So it's not always easy to do that, but it's very important to us to be as transparent as we can. And that's been true for many, many years. The other thing I would say is more this idea of autonomy. We're very focused on all individuals on our team feeling continued forward momentum in their own trajectories, but not in a prescriptive way, if that makes sense. We are very, we can be very idiosyncratic about what growth can look like for different people. And we have built a culture that really encourages people to take ownership and responsibility in a shared way before we were even in ESOP. So if you see something that the firm needs to focus on that we're not currently focusing enough on and you're excited about it, it's sort of yours for the taking. And there are so many examples of people doing that over the history of CI. So even when newer people come in, they see how other individuals have taken ownership of this thing here or this thing here. And we very much encourage that, as opposed to every shift in the digital landscape being a top-down decision on how the firm is going to handle it. And part of that is I'm not sitting around working one-on-one with clients. I don't have as clear a pulse on the front line as our consultants do with our clients. And so frankly, I think the work being more informed by people on the front lines, hearing these issues from their clients, hearing the challenges, I think it's a better solution that we ultimately come to at least have that input and that perspective driving the solutions that we ultimately take.
There's this comes from one of Daniel Pink's books, but when he looked at what motivates people and what does the research say, he boiled it down to three core things: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So the opportunity to learn and practice a skill, to get really good at something,
Yeah.
to have some latitude in making decisions, and taking initiative, to
Yeah.
have some agency, and then a connection to a higher purpose. And it
Hmm.
appears to me that whether it's deliberate or not, you're really focused on those three levers. You said
Yeah.
something to me about your own interest in the arts, and it was the potential for the arts to create a society that's more empathetic and compassionate. What
Yeah.
a motivating purpose. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you're getting autonomy and mastery as well.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Definitely intentional. But yeah, I think that sense of purpose is also something that we hire for. Like
Mhm.
this, there we're not just any agency out here doing digital marketing. We're specifically trying to help arts and culture move forward by way of digital marketing, and all of the people on this team are driven by that purpose in one way, shape, or form, and it's prevalent in conversations from the very beginning of people's journeys at CI.
Wow. That's very exciting. And we could do like several of these on each of these threads. But I
Yes.
don't want to forget the reason that what brought us together initially.
Yeah.
We of course have worked with you from the ESOP angle. Most recently, we were helping with your annual statement distribution, distributing those statements to the participants and helping to provide some context to what they were seeing. And in preparing for that, I watched your State of the Union, and then you said this again during your comments at the annual statement event that we did virtually, and it was this notion of hospitality and the role that hospitality needs to play in your competitive advantage as an organization. And that was really intriguing to me because it occurred to me, I started to think about what does that word hospitality mean? And I think I mentioned this too. I've kind of got one foot in my Anglo-Saxon, my sort of WASP upbringing from northern New Jersey, and we've got an idea of hospitality, which is sort of like come over but don't stay too long. Um,
Yeah.
and then I'm also an Italian citizen. I'm married to an Italian. I've lived in Italy, and the hospitality is very, very important. And people bend
Hmm.
over backwards to think about what does it mean to be a good host. And the WASP in me sometimes can get very frustrated with that. But there's this giving of yourself, there's this graciousness. And so I started to think about that and realized that you meant something profound by hospitality, not superficial. and
Yeah.
and that really intrigued me, both because it makes you unique, but also because I think there's something here for other purpose-driven employee-owned businesses to draw on. So, could you tell me a little bit more about this notion of hospitality? What does it mean to you, and what role does it play, and do you see it playing at Capacity Interactive?
Yeah. So, this I'll first say where this started. And this all started for me back in, what year are we in? We're in 2025. So last year was 2024. So this started at the end of 2023 because I came across a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. Perhaps some of you have heard of it, by Will Guidara, who is one of the former owners of 11 Madison Park in New York. And
Mm-hmm.
the book is incredible. If you're an audiobook person, I also recommend the audiobook because he himself narrates it, and it's pretty incredible to just hear his own recounting of his own book. But anyway, this book really inspired me, and it inspired me because some of it is some of what was already at the heart and has always been at the heart of the way that we consult at CI. But I think through COVID, some of that heart got covered by other things because we were all in panic mode and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So hospitality at its core is about a focus on delivering an exceptional experience to the person that you're serving, and that being your number one priority in any interaction you have with that person. And there are many ways to go above and beyond to make someone feel special and to make sure that someone has a great experience. Some of which are surface level, but some of which actually help you do the work better with that person. So in the case of our business, how do we anticipate the needs of our clients and our constituency before our constituency can even anticipate that for themselves? That happens through a lot of listening, not just to what people are saying, but to what they're not saying. That comes from a lot of listening to the side comments that people make about the stress that they have outside of the room that we're consulting in, and us trying to understand how our service can also help them with those stresses outside of the room and put things into a greater picture to offer ultimately better service to them. And ultimately it leads to better outcomes at the end of the day, because everything becomes more holistic and you're serving the actual needs as opposed to the assumed needs, or what somebody told you they needed when they didn't really know what they needed. And I think in terms of CI and why at the end of 2023 it really hit for me is we were at a place where arts and culture, of course, was hit really hard by COVID. Doors closed for all arts and cultural institutions.
Yeah.
We couldn't gather for a really long time. And then recovery has been really hard. And I would say it continues to be really hard. And for us as a firm that serves the nonprofit arts and cultural sector in majority, the way that our work shifted during that time, of course, became far more reactive than proactive, because organizations themselves had to become far more reactive than proactive. And so it became about trying to anticipate what the next fire we'd have to put out would be, or when the organization got 1 week's notice that they were going to reopen, what can we do at that point? Or what's happening with the budgets? How are we keeping audiences while the doors are closed? So it was harder for us to be proactive, and we had to sort of go where we were needed. And so I think then doors opened. There's this intense pressure on recovering revenue, recovering attendance. And so we're very focused on the dollars. We always have to be focused on the dollars to some extent, but it's very focused on the dollars. There's a lot of pressure marketing teams are getting internally. We are in turn feeling that pressure and wanting to support these teams as much as we possibly can. So the idea of making visitor interactions inside of arts organizations feel exceptional, that isn't necessarily the number one priority at that point, right? It's how do we get butts and seats? We got to get butts and seats. We got to get butts and seats. And so I think now, as we get to the end of 2023, we go into 2024, things are sort of, I would say, more settled. I don't want to say fully recovered, because they're certainly not. And in some cases, I don't know that they ever fully will get back to pre-pandemic times, but we are definitely in a place now where the competition has never been more to get people off their couch and through the doors of these arts and cultural institutions. There are so many different ways to spend your time. There are so many different things to stream. There is TikTok, there are so many ways to spend your time and to give your eyes to. And so choosing an arts organization has to not just be about what's happening on their stages, but it has to also be about the experience that you have the moment you walk in the door, after you transact. How does it feel to be seen by that organization? How does it feel when you walk through the door? Is parking a hassle? Do the ushers yell at you? Can you bring your drinks into the theater? Like, all of these things are part of the experience. It's not just about the art. And then when you leave, do you hear from them again? How are they trying to get you back? How are they cultivating a relationship with you? Are they, aren't they? There are all these questions. So there's the hospitality element, certainly within arts and culture, that we want to support, but also in the way that we consult, when you're not in this reactive space, and you can be more proactive, and you can be the outside partner that helps these marketing teams get back to a place where they're thinking more proactively and more strategically. And we can help them do that by anticipating their needs when they they can't even think about it because there are so many other things going on with recovery. We should be doing that. And that should be the way that we're serving our clients. And so that was sort of the impetus for me. This book came at that very specific moment in time. And it just has been sort of a clear focus for us going through 2024. And now even as we continue into 2025, I think it's an incredibly important thing. I think it's a thing that sets us apart in the way that we serve. And I think it's the thing that makes the experience the best it can possibly be for our clients.
Yeah, this, you touched on the way you described what happened during COVID, made it very vivid to me, and it kind of brought me back to those, days and weeks where it, in different ways, it felt like if the world wasn't ending, at least it was coming to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a crisis, not like dealing with like a recession where maybe there was going to be some layoffs, but it was a pretty existential, particularly for the arts. And you are completely in service to and dependent on the arts for your revenue and your existence as a business. And I'm just wondering, this is not good. This was probably not the first time that you had to provide leadership during a crisis. And it's not going to be the last. And the same for any of the leaders that are listening to this interview. And I'm just wondering if, as you think back to that COVID experience, what are one or two things that you did as a leader or that you did as an organization that you think were really helpful in pulling people through to the other end of that? And this is way off script, so I apologize for throwing that one at you. And I will come back to hospitality, I promise.
Yeah. I mean, I think, when I think back to COVID times, one of the things that to me was really important is this idea, there are so many, everyone's having a different experience. There were people who were losing family members to COVID.
Yeah.
There were people who were, their jobs were at stake. They didn't know when their next paycheck would come. They didn't know if they would be furloughed. We didn't know about institutions being able to continue, specifically in arts and culture. That was a big focus. And I think as a leader in those times, you also have your own pressures, right? Like, how is the business going to continue to run? How am I going to keep my staff? How do I make sure that the staff I keep is as productive as possible? All of these things are going. And to me, the most important thing in that time is empathy for your people. And I think meeting people where they were was so important because everyone was having a different experience. There were some people who, there are some people who were like, I really miss that moment where we paused and every night we played games and we binged TV and we ate whatever we wanted and we had really great quality time with our family. Like, some people were having that experience. Some people, again, were sitting in hospitals or wondering what was happening to their loved ones. And both of those people could be coming in to work on the exact same team. Yeah. And if you're not meeting people where they are, then I don't know how you can expect to communicate at all or get anything done, And so that to me felt super important. Another thing I would say CI specifically did is, of course, it felt like all of a sudden there was all this time because a lot of organizations, we had to pause the work altogether. Right. But CI really took time to kind of think about ways for us to use our expertise to serve the industry as a whole and create a sense of community. So there were many live streams that we did. We brought in a lot of leaders to speak through interviews and things like that, because again, at the core of this business is service of arts and culture, and being flexible to what the definition of that means at any moment in time is really important. And in that time, people needed to not feel as isolated as they were physically inside of their homes alone. And so we took that part seriously in creating a sense of community. And, we have our annual conference. We did it more than just the one time during that year. We had sort of like emergency webinar, live stream type things. And just like a lot of conversation for people and creating this sense of community for people, again, because of the isolation. So,
when we prepped for this and we first sort of talked about, reflected on hospitality, the thing that I was most surprised that I wasn't expecting, it made sense to me that was a strategy for engaging with clients, for creating a special experience for clients. What I wasn't expecting was for you to talk about the role of hospitality in particular, and more broadly CI, in influencing the industry to be more hospitable to its clients.
Yeah.
So that's really that's a really exciting idea to me. And I'm wondering, we've got a few more minutes here. If you could just give me couple of examples, like if I'm a client of yours, how am I in a concrete way going to experience hospitality? Can you speak a little bit more about the annual conference? Because that just sounds really awesome on a lot of different levels. And what are the ways that you are or hope to be impacting the industry more broadly through your presence in the industry, through the work that you do? So examples of how I would experience hospitality as a client and how you're impacting the industry.
Yeah. So I think let me talk about the industry impact piece first, because so this year, or this past year, 2024, we host our annual conference every year in New York. It's in October, and we usually host it at the Time Center. And this year, hospitality was the theme of the conference, which is interesting because this conference used to be called Digital Marketing Bootcamp for the Arts. Okay. And I would say over the years, it's evolved to be more of an arts marketing conference, not just digital, but arts marketing as a whole. But still, when you think arts marketing, perhaps hospitality is not the first thing that you think. But we made the theme of the conference hospitality because hospitality is the thing we all should be thinking about first and foremost when we think about audience development and retaining audiences over time, which is a huge issue right now in the arts. Getting audiences to come back is incredibly difficult. And yes, there are elements of this that are marketing focused, and there are elements of this that are not marketing focused. But at the end of the day, we all have the same objective, whether or not you're a marketer inside of an institution or in any other department inside of an institution. You want the institution to continue to thrive, and the way to do that is to keep people coming and keep people coming back. So this idea of retention is a concern. And so we very much wanted to focus on the idea of hospitality from many different angles. We had people inside of the industry speak about hospitality. We had people outside of the industry speak about hospitality. And we wanted to sort of make the statement about the importance of hospitality for our industry today, and the idea that this is the key area in which, if we can grow, we can see the longevity of audiences over time, which is something that institutions across verticals really need to see right now. So it was meant to sort of spark this idea of priority, spark this inspiration for cross-departmental conversation, which I think is a big key to being able to implement this across an organization. So that's kind of how it showed up on our conference stage. And of course, we have many clients come to our conference. We also have many non-clients come to our conference. And so now what's happening is those clients who have come, they're talking to their consultants, their portfolio managers about this idea of hospitality and thinking about how it does intersect with marketing. So what does it mean when we have 80% of our audience for a single show brand new to the organization? Are we sending them something specific? Are we making sure that when they arrive to the theater that they have a treat waiting on their seat, or they have a specific person coming and shaking their hand. How is that experience
Yep.
better for them? So that again, when they go home and they recount their evening, it's not about the friction when they were parking. It's not about the fact that they couldn't bring their drink into the theater, but it's about the bag that was waiting for them, or the person who made them feel seen, or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then are they hearing from you right after? And are you then getting feedback from them, whatever that might be. So that's kind of how it has infiltrated conversations since, I would say. And I hope that continues to grow and expand. And I do think some attendees felt like it was a kind of radical thing to choose hospitality as the theme for a marketing conference. Like, does that or does that not make sense? But at the end of the day, our arts marketing is really about continuing to help the arts thrive. And right now, hospitality is such an important key to making that possible. So that's kind of the greater impact piece. I think in terms of client interactions, to me, hospitality should be unique and idiosyncratic. So we shouldn't have, universal ways in which people
Yeah.
can be hospitable, because so much of it is about in the moment, anticipating the needs, hearing the things that your clients aren't saying, and being able to respond to those and being that support for your client. But I think, a few things that you might see repeat over time are, when you get on a call with a client, that those first 5 minutes, not just being about setting the agenda, but really being about getting a read for how that client's coming into the room. Are they kind of out of breath? What kind of day have they had?
Yeah.
We just had our the holiday time. What did you do? How did you spend that time? Really having it be about human connection, as opposed to solely transactionally about a vendor relationship. I hate that word vendor. I never want any of our clients to call us a vendor. We're humans interacting with one another with a shared goal. And I think that's the other piece is, how are these goals shared? Ultimately the marketing team is responsible for the revenue goals, but in a relationship with CI that's working really well, CI is an extension of that marketing team that owns the revenue goals. And so if there are other factors outside of our scope of work that are contributing to it being more difficult to making the revenue goal, we should be talking about those, because that's still strategically part of what's happening. And maybe there are ways that we can still support that, even if it's outside of the scope of work. We can figure it out, So I think it's about being less transactional in those ways. I think it's celebrating milestones when we renew, and we've been working together for 5 years, for 10 years. Let's celebrate that. That's a really long client partnership, and that's something that we should be celebrating. If a client constituent has a birthday, let's acknowledge that. We're all human beings, it's those moments, I think, that just fill out the relationship, that take it from vendor to human interaction, that just really define hospitality to me.
Oh, that's really beautiful. So let's kind of bring it on home here. How do you sustain this? And what role in particular do you see the fact that you're employee-owned playing in sustaining this, and how does hospitality relate to being employee-owned?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, hospitality, so employee ownership is, for us, a lot of the culture didn't necessarily change when we became employee owned. What happened is that the success of the firm became the success of the employees in a more direct, connected way. And so since we've become an ESOP, that's what we talk a lot about. Making CI better benefits all of us, not just in okay, now everyone gets a raise or everyone gets a bonus, but in a bigger way than that, in a far bigger way than that. And we all have the power to shape what we want CI to be as we move forward. It's all collective responsibility and therefore collective benefit. And I think hospitality just to speak like very business landscape focused, the competitor space now compared to back in 2008, specifically thinking about marketing for arts and culture, that space is far more crowded now than it ever was before. And I think hospitality is one of the things that sets us apart. So that, to me, does therefore place a specific value on what it's like to work with CI in particular. It makes us the yes choice for people as a result of just the way it feels to work with us. And that benefits CI in the long term. So certainly talking about that. I think in terms of what the longevity of this looks like anything else, repetition, connection to the big picture, and the results coming from leadership. So the opportunities that we have to communicate, connecting that to hospitality, like we did during the ESOP statement when you joined us, being able to connect all of these things together as much as possible. I think so much of leadership is being that connection and that bridge in the way that you communicate. And that's where hospitality comes in, allowing that to eventually become shorthand for the firm, the way that we talk about hospitality. And some of this is already happening with our team. I haven't mentioned this yet, but we use Slack internally for our internal communications, and we created a channel that is called Thank You for Your Hospitality. And it's an opportunity for all of our team members to celebrate their other team members when they do something really hospitable. And they share the example in the thread, one, for inspiration for others, but two, to just give a little bit of light and accolade to our fellow team. So that's been really, really lovely. And I think that many of the pillars that are what CI is today have come from this sort of repetition and connection to the bigger picture. And I don't think hospitality is any exception to that. I think the continued celebration and reinforcing is important. And then like holding ourselves accountable. So for example, we just went through a budgeting process, and for this year, we have a line item in the budget that is client hospitality, which means that we have, it's not a ton of money, but it's some money for portfolio managers to be able to use to be more hospitable in their client relationships, in whatever way that means. Does that mean you send a treat when a client renews? Maybe. Does it mean you send a birthday treat? Maybe. Does it mean something completely different I can't think of right now? Sure. I don't want to be prescriptive about it. But I think that's some of the accountability behind this. So, those are some of the ideas that I have in terms of the longevity of this thing. And again, it was born out of this immense need in this moment. It's incredibly relevant. And as other things happen in that way, it should mold and change. I don't want it to just be the thing because we've said it's the thing. But right now it's incredibly important.
When we look at the role of leaders in shaping culture, one of the things that we know is the alignment between stated, between words and actions is so important. And so just something like setting aside in the budget, no matter how large or small, that's an important symbol of a commitment to living this value of hospitality in a real concrete terms. I think what I'm hearing is the important role of leadership, right? Both in terms of creating an expectation, but also inspiring people around a vision. I'm hearing also the important role in creating space, in hiring the right types of people, investing in their skills, and then giving them space to live into those values in a way that's authentic for them and that is idiosyncratic, because it wouldn't be hospitality if it wasn't about my deeply listening to your needs and creating an experience that responds to those needs.
Absolutely.
And I think the thing that I just want to close on is a note of gratitude to you and to Capacity Interactive, because I think there's a lot of similarities between Praxis and Capacity Interactive in the sense that we're not a consulting firm that figured out if we showed up at these ESOP conferences we would get clients. Just in the way that you're not a digital marketing firm that figured out there was a market for your services in the arts. You're deeply committed to the role of the arts in the world. And we're deeply committed to helping businesses that are sharing ownership do that more effectively so that they can have an even bigger impact on the world. And so my note of gratitude was to say thank you to you to allowing us in a small way to hopefully contribute to your ability to create a more empathic and compassionate world.
Thank you, Matt. This has been such a lovely conversation, and I'm just incredibly grateful to all of the support Praxis has offered Capacity, but also you in particular. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Priya.